Terry Maxwell here. Welcome to this event. I'm really glad you're here. I have the pleasure of introducing you to one of our new master teachers. He's somebody that I hounded because I really wanted his work on our platform and pursued. He's an award-winning international leadership and success speaker, 2 decades in the area of leadership development. He spent 12 years with the National Society of Leadership and Success, creating some leadership honor societies with over 600 chapters and 1 million members. He successfully managed 40 employees and 600 interns, so he really knows about leadership and communication. And what I love about Tim's work is that he really brings together the head and the heart. So he's going to be bringing together some methodologies. He has 2 courses on the ShiftCo platform. Biggest challenges for conscious entrepreneurs, what do they face in mastering success habits, which we all know is really important. And then high performance communication for conscious entrepreneurs. So Tim, your legacy precedes you, and I just feel honored to be in your presence. I can't wait to introduce the Shift community to your work. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Terry. I really appreciate the opportunity and welcome everybody who took time out of their schedules to actually be here and listen to this presentation. So let's jump right in because I don't think we should waste any time. So what you are going to be learning in today's session is we're going to be covering some of the modules that are in the actual presentation in the ShiftCo community members area. So in this presentation, we're going to cover discover your preferred communication style and your behavioral tendencies and what may be your strengths and weaknesses. We're going to help develop more compassion and understanding, because I don't know if you're like me and you witness what's going on in our society, and we are becoming more and more tribal, more and more separated. You're on this side, I'm on this side. And so this presentation is really about helping to understand one another, especially around our personality traits and our behavior traits. And it also affects our political beliefs. So I'm doing the most dangerous thing and talking a little bit about politics in our presentation today. So don't chop my head off, please. And then we're going to be talking about how to flex your communication style to other different personalities. And because we only had an hour today, the training is usually much longer, much more comprehensive. We cover other topics in this training, such as why you dislike certain types of people and which communication styles or personality traits increase performance. But if you care about those topics, you'll have to log into your members area of ShiftCo and check that out. So let's go right into personality tests. So there's a lot of different personality tests out there. And before I start discussing them, I thought that I'd always give a really good disclaimer. I am not a psychologist. I don't have a degree in personality traits and communications. I'll leave that to the psychologist and those experts with the doctorates. I am just a student like all of you who really cares about leadership development. And if you know anything about leadership, leadership is defined as the ability to influence and persuade others for a common cause, goal, or a purpose. So if you're going to help persuade and influence others, you're going to need to learn about people and how to communicate. And so that became a fascination of mine in studying personality assessments and different tests. And so a lot of different communication styles and tests are out there. I thought that the best place to start is what psychology says about personality. And so they have a theory called the Big 5 traits of personality. And what they did is they took at all the different words to describe people and they categorized them. And so what they found is once you siphon it down more and more, there are 5 broad spectrums of personality. And so we're going to do a kind of a skim of, we're going to look at the tip of the iceberg that just kind of describes what those personality types are, because I think it's very helpful to have that base as a foundation before we jump into what I think is going to be the most successful tool to understand communicating different people, which is called DISC. Now, when I was very young and in college, I attended all these different leadership retreats. I would say that the most popular personality test is called the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI. You probably have heard of it. I'm assuming that maybe even some of you have taken the test yourself. I took that test in college, and guess what? I learned a little bit about it. I thought it was very helpful because I learned about the difference between maybe extroversion and introversion and things like that. But I'm going to give you my opinion. You're here listening to my presentation. So here's my thoughts. I think Myers-Briggs is too complicated for the average person. There are 16 personality types. So you either are going to be an ISTJ, an ENFP, or an INTP. I mean, there are communities online where you can match up and meet with those people of those different personality types. Now, for me, I prefer something much more simple, easy to use, and that's why we're going to be talking about DISC, which is a very common and practical personality assessment that I think, based on what I've seen, a lot of Fortune 500 companies use. They may not call it that, but if you ever apply for a job and you may actually have to take an exam, what that exam might be is one, part IQ test to see how analytical you can be. And part two would be, what's your personality type, using DISC or some other personality assessment to say, are you really a right fit for this role? And so we're going to jump into that. So let's jump into the big 5 traits of personality. Let's start off with extroversion. A lot of you have heard of it. People say, I'm an extrovert. When you think of extrovert, you think of somebody who's very outgoing, people who love people. And so in one extreme, I use Jim Carrey as the perfect example. This is the person that when you just feel so energized when he enters a room and he's around different people, engaging and interactive. On the opposite spectrum is an introvert, somebody who could be very quiet, thoughtful, a little bit more reserved. And I use the example of Keanu Reeves. And if you've ever seen him play in different movies, he's always quiet, very subtle. When he sees the most amazing thing in the movie, The Matrix, what is his response? Whoa, like very, very subdued. So again, not some people could be extroverts, some people could be introverts, or can be somewhere in the middle. Now, I oftentimes hear a lot of people will say, Tim, how come sometimes I feel like an introvert and sometimes I feel like an extrovert? And I say, well, the way in which they've defined it is, where do you get energized most? Do you find that when you're around people, you actually feel more excited, more energized? Listen, I would consider myself an extrovert, but that doesn't mean that I get exhausted and I want to actually be by myself, be with my little fur babies, my cats and dogs, and I don't want to talk to anybody. That's okay, and that's normal. But for some people, if you're an introvert, it's just to go out into a public setting, to go out and talk with other people, that takes like extra work, and it takes so much energy that you're just exhausted. So again, you don't have to be an extreme, one or the other. You may be on the spectrum, somewhere in the middle. It's just helpful to really understand people and that they follow into that category. The next is an agreeableness trait. And to me, I actually found this trait the most important for my self-discovery. And so I'm going to explain to you what that means. So I use the example in The Big Bang Theory. It's a very popular TV show. If you haven't seen it, there's these 2 characters that are reminded of like the Odd Couple. You have Leonard here on the left, who's just a very agreeable person. He's very cooperative, very kind, affectionate. If you've ever seen the show, he's always saying yes, always really helping out. He almost becomes like a parent, like a mom to Sheldon, who's right here on the right. And Sheldon here on the right side is somebody we would describe as a disagreeable person. Why? It's because he tends to be more self-focused, very assertive and insensitive. Now, way back when, I used to think, in my binary mind, agreeableness is good, disagreeableness is bad. But what I have evolved based on my education and experience is that there's no right or wrong with respect to these 2 extremes in this personality. What I have found is that you should actually be both of these. And I'll give you a perfect example. Let's just say, as conscious entrepreneurs, you tend to be on the agreeableness side. Well, what ends up happening is you tend to be more compliant, more giving in, and just saying yes to a lot of different opportunities. And what ends up happening is that you could end up saying yes to things that you don't want to just because you feel bad, right? And you overcommit yourself and all these different things. And so there are some times where you actually have to learn to be disagreeable. And there's just so many different examples, because what ends up going to happen is if you are too agreeable all the time, you're going to be taken advantage of. And what's worse is you could develop resentment. And I can speak of this from personal experience. This showed up in the workplace. This showed up in my personal life with my relationship with my wife. One of the best books that I've ever read that really transformed my relationship was No More Mr. Nice Guy. And what that book told me, if you're a highly agreeable person, you actually have to start saying no a lot more. And you actually have to risk offended people, risk them not liking you. But if you can actually learn to flex that muscle of disagreeableness, it could end up helping you become much more successful and helping you eliminate that resentment. So I think that a lot of you in this conscious community might resonate with that. So let's keep going. The next personality trait, according to the Big Five theory, is conscientiousness. Now, for some people, this is very difficult to pronounce. I'll say it one more time. Conscientious. And what that means on one extreme is people who are highly conscientious are very organized, very detailed oriented, and very disciplined. I used a character from a movie played by Cuba Gooding Jr. You could just imagine, right, that as soon as this individual wakes up, he has a list, his to-do list, and is checking everything off, folding his bed, has the shoes in the right corner, in the same corner always. It's just people who have just tremendous discipline and follow through with exactly what they have as their to-do list. On the opposite extreme, you have somebody who is very unconscientious. And if you've ever seen the movie The Big Lebowski, which is a cult classic, you have this character played by Jeff Bridges, which is the dude. And you could just tell he's the total opposite. He's very relaxed, gets easily distracted, tends to procrastinate. He's like, yeah, whatever, man. And so again, there are times where you feel like relaxing. There's times that you're much more conscientious, but really figure out where are you on that spectrum. Now, I put a little star, if you noticed, upper right-hand corner next to conscientious. Why? Because, like I promised to share with you at the beginning of this program, there have been studies about personality traits and political beliefs. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just going to quote the study directly. So this is also part of the resources of ShiftCo. If you check out my presentation, you'll get a link, or you can download it, or you can search this in Google. It's called Big Five Personality Traits and Political Orientation. And here's what they found. As conscientiousness increases, the level of conservatism increases. Whoa, for me, that my mind was blown. And so why is that? It's because conservatives, individuals, tend to want stable, predictable environments, and they want that environment that has familiarity. So it's not the only reason why somebody might tend to be more conservative, but when you take conscientiousness and you pair it with the trait openness, which we're going to talk about next, it's even a larger predictor of political orientation. So let's go into the next. Openness to experience. So if you're like me, you grew up in a different generation. I imagine you, some of you may be older, younger, whatever it may be. There was a very popular movie called Sister Act, starring Whoopi Goldberg. It was fantastic. And so to me, Whoopi, is the perfect example of this trait, openness to experience. People who have high degrees of openness tend to be more curious, more adventurous, and more creative. And you could just tell, just from the movie. If you haven't seen it, I'll give you a little bit of the synopsis, is that or a little bit of the plot. She's a Las Vegas performer, a singer, and she witnesses a murder. And so in order for her to go into a protective custody, they decide to send her to a convent, right, in New York City. And what ensues, it's hilarious. And you could tell that she just is so like a fish out of water. Who's a nun wearing sunglasses, trying to do all these different things? Because why? She has a high degree of openness. She's challenging, like, let's do it differently than what we're supposed to be doing. But on the opposite extreme, you have the Mother Superior, the person who's leading this convent, and she has a low degree of openness. So she's resistant, she's closed, she doesn't want to change. She's like, no, this is the way that we've done it, and this is the way we always done it, and so this is how we have to continue. So again, I thought that was very fascinating to see those two extremes in that one movie, but that's what makes it an interesting movie. I won't spoil the ending, but you're going to have to watch it. And so what does the political analysis say? It says that there is a 2 standard deviation increase with the trait openness was correlated to a 0.66 with liberalism. So basically, liberals are more likely to be higher in the trait openness, which makes perfect sense. Why? Because liberals are pushing the boundaries in terms of policies, whether it be social or economic. So again, once I actually understood that there are different personality behaviors and that it could lead toward different political leanings, now it's like, okay, now I understand why in this world there's always different extremes of political points of views. And if we can actually understand that individual, where they're coming from, we can have a little bit more empathy and we can understand each other a little bit better. Now, again, it's not to say that all people, whether you could be high degree of openness or liberal, you can have a high degree of openness and still be conservative. Again, I'm just using these as polar extremes for us to help educate and understand one another a little bit better. And in the resources, you could actually read the study that I've included a link, and it goes into much more detail than I'm going here, but for the sake of time, we'll just cover that. And then the last personality trait, which is neuroticism. So again, the definition of neuroticism is high extremes in different emotions. So if you've ever seen the TV show Game of Thrones, which I'm a big fan of, there is this character on the left called Samuel Tully, and you could just see in his face, he's an individual that goes through extremes of different emotions, can be very moody, very anxious, very emotional. And so as you see him progress throughout the show, he ends up evolving, which I think is a very good thing for you to evolve and grow and to be much more calm, stable, more confident. But on the other extreme, you have Tywin Lannister, this individual on the right. Now, again, Tywin Lannister is not really a good character, does some very shady, bad things, but I'm not speaking about that. I'm just talking about the perspective of neuroticism. This is a guy who's completely stable, relaxed, and calm. I mean, you could see in the TV show, one of his family members just was killed. He doesn't even show an ounce of emotion. He will stay cool, calm. It's like, okay, what's next? You know, and it's just that kind of coldness. Now, why did studying this personality trait really benefit me? Is because forgive me, am a recovering judgeaholic, okay? So what I would do is I would see people, whether it was a family member or a friend, I would say, why are they so upset? Why are they getting so emotional? Like nothing just happened. And so once I would think that something was wrong with them. And so once I started studying personality and I realized that there's this whole trait of neuroticism, it's like, oh, there are actually people who are much more sensitive to their emotions and can go through different extremes. And so now that I had some kind of label for it, it helped me develop more empathy. And this was with family members and other kind of friends and say, okay, listen, they just may have a higher degree of neuroticism than maybe this other individual. And it helped me to accept, understand, and better communicate with them. So let's keep going. So that was the big 5 trait personality. Now, if anybody has any questions, feel free to, raise your digital hand. I'm happy to answer them. If not, I'll keep going with the rest of the presentation. And so now what I'm going to talk about is DISC. So DISC is the very popular personality assessment, and it's my favorite one because it's so simple and easy to use. What it tells you is what your behavioral tendencies are, how you contribute to a team, how you handle stress, and maybe how you problem solve. What it doesn't tell you is how emotionally intelligent you are, how mature you are, or how you will perform a task. Now, there's much more that I go into with respect to the module about this, but this is what we'll cover for today's training. So because you all here don't have access to a test that you could answer 20, 30 questions and figure out what your DISC personality assessment is, we're going to do a super short test. I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and then you have, based on your answer, I can tell what your DISC personality type is. Are you all ready? Let's go. So here's the scenario. Question number 1. You're entering an unfamiliar room. Okay. You've never been in this room before. And as you walk in, how do you see yourself when you enter that room? Do you walk in and say, hey, I'm a person that I can shape that environment around me? Or am I the opposite? As soon as I go into the room, I want to adapt to whatever that environment is. So if you go into a room, you say, hey, it's kind of quiet. It's like, come on, if you're pumped up and let's make some noise in here. Let's get the party started. Or if everybody's quiet, you're like, ooh, maybe I should be quiet too. What's going on? It's just two ways of how you see yourself when you enter the room. Now, I'm going to give you a little disclaimer. Some people might say, well, depending on my environment, I may act differently in different environments. If I'm entering my home, I feel like I can shape that environment, but maybe when I'm work, I may tend to adapt that environment. Well, that's the beautiful thing about DISC and this personality test. It's you are that behavioral tendency based on the way you answer those questions. So choose one environment, and then that will be the question for the sake of this example. So if you, let's just say it's work, ask yourself in terms of that question. When at work, doing your stuff, how do you see yourself when you enter the environment? So we would call people who believe that they can shape the environment as active, and people who want to adapt to the environment as thoughtful. Now, it doesn't mean that people who are active aren't thoughtful people. These are just two key words to help us describe this phenomenon. So you shape that environment or you adapt to that environment. You're thoughtful. Now you're in the room, and guess what? In this room, there are a bunch of people talking. Okay. And there's some reports on the table. And now here's my second question to you. What do you focus on when you enter in that room? Some people will tend to focus on the task. There's all these people, and where do the eyes go to? The reports. What are they talking about? Are they talking about today's numbers or the news? It's all about the task. Other people are focused on the people. Oh my gosh, there's Lisa. Oh my goodness, there's Muhammad. I want to say hello. They couldn't care less about what they're actually talking about. They care so much about people. So ask yourself to this question: are you task-oriented focused or people-focused? And so once you answer those two questions, that's your DISC personality assessment. So if you're active and task-oriented, you're considered D for dominant. If you're active and people-oriented, I for influencer. If you're thoughtful and task-oriented, you're C for conscientiousness. Now notice that word, right, reminds us of the big five trait personality, conscientiousness. And then if you're thoughtful and you're focused on people, you're an S for steadiness. Now, I have to let you know that there are a lot of different DISCs assessments out there. There's a free assessment that's I've included in the link for the ShiftCo community for you to take that free test. But just be aware that there are different types of DISCs. One has a lowercase I instead of a capital I with a registered trademark. Some substitute the word S for steadiness and they use the word S for stability. It all depends on copyright, things like that, for whatever it is. For this purpose of this training, I'm just going to use these terms, okay? And I'm not poo-pooing any of those other assessments, high quality assessments. The more you pay for some of these assessments, I would imagine you'd get a much more comprehensive analysis. So if that's something that you're interested into, I'd encourage you to go and do that. So let's jump in and give the strengths, weaknesses, and discussions about these personality types. And as I'm describing them, if you answered whether you are a dominant, influencer, conscientious, or steadiness, I want you to ask yourself, is this really describing me? Or I want you to ask yourself this question. As I'm describing these personality types, you'll say, oh my goodness, I know a person who just fits this exactly to the T. So again, once we're done, I love to hear what's coming up for you. So for dominance, what are dominants focused on? Remember, these are the task-oriented people, active-oriented people. So their key traits or characters are adventurous, decisive, direct, all about solving the problem. Their motto is, all right, people, let's hurry up. Let's go. We got stuff to do. And so if you look into movies, TV, I included some characters, Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man, Viola Davis from, Suicide Squad, and even, the character from Big Bang Theory, Bernadette. And so what was so interesting about Bernadette is I loved including her in these examples, because if you first meet her, She very high-pitched voice, seems very quiet, but then guess what? When you see her in her relationship with Howard, her boyfriend, eventually husband, and when you see her at interacting with, she's a total dominant. She's like, get it done. People are afraid of her. And so I love that idea that, we have to tend to stereotype certain people, and yet, we could all fit these different personality types. So what are some attributes? Dominants bring great value to the team. They're all the ones that initiate activity, bottom line organizers, challenge oriented. So if you have a group of friends and you say, okay, what movie do we want to see? Your dominant in the group is going to say, let's go see Maverick, Top Gun. If you don't have any dominants in that group, guess what's going to happen? What movie do you want to see? I don't know. What movie do you want to see? What do you want to see? And you might take forever to figure out a movie. So again, they add something to the group. The ideal working environment, especially if you're managing either contractors or employees that are dominant, guess what? They don't want to be controlled. And also they love a work challenge and have an opportunity. So for example, if you have to give a dominant the same boring job over and over again, they're going to lose it because they need new stimulation, a new challenge, and they need a forum to express their ideas and viewpoints. So if you tell a dominant, all right, do this exactly what I need you to do. Okay, no questions, bye. They're going to go crazy, right? Because they need to say, hey, maybe I have another way of doing it. Why do I have to do it your way, right? So it's just something to be aware of if you're managing or dealing with those type of people. Now, imagine a dominant is stressed out. How do they interact? Well, they tend to be very demanding, right? Or could be. They can come across very aggressive or egotistical because they may not be considering other people, other people's feelings. All they're all focused on is, task, hurry up, let's go, I need this done now. And so you might say, ooh, disgusting, like, why are you being so mean? It's like, oh, it's because they're under high stress and just focused on the task. Again, something to be aware of. And then what are the limitations of the dominance? This is the biggest thing that I've actually seen with dominance. Oftentimes, dominants rise within a company. Why? They tend to become managers, senior level executives, because they do so much, right? It's all about getting it done, getting it fast, getting it quickly. But now they're in a position of power. And now whenever they need an employee to do something, what happens if the employee wants to challenge them and say, listen, I know you want us to do this, but I don't think we should do this, or I think we should do something else. Well, a possible limitation of a dominant is they might overuse their position, and they might say, listen, I'm the boss, just do what I tell you to do and just do it, right? Okay. Now that could be very dangerous. Why? Because you haven't given them an opportunity. You could actually be wrong. We got to keep our egos in check. And because we're not dealing with life or death situations, or we're on a surgery table and you need somebody to give you that scalpela and you don't have time for questions, most of the things that we always do, we have the opportunity to actually have conversations with people. So get that buy-in, have a conversation. And as we talk about the other personality types, we'll see why that's so important. So that's a very, very important lesson. If you are a dominant that's listening to this, be very careful to not overuse and use your position to get what you want. They'll end up doing the job not to their full or best ability, and because you didn't give an opportunity for them to express themselves. Another limitation is lack tact or diplomacy, or because it's all like, get it done, might hurt some other people's feelings, and then they end up taking on too much too soon, too fast. The dominants are excellent at getting so much stuff done that when everyone, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? They're like, yes, yes, yes. Why? Because they're so used to getting so much done so quickly. But then when they come home at night and they're like, oh my goodness, I've just committed to doing these 10 tasks. Now I have to pull an all-nighter. I got to do whatever it takes to get all these done. So again, dominants have to be very careful about burning the candlestick at both ends. So before I go into the next personality, I know I've been talking a lot. I'd love to hear from the group. Does anybody here really resonate with being a dominant themselves? And I'm speaking to the team, or do they know anybody who's a very big dominant? I'd love for you guys to raise your digital hand or share what it is for you. Don't be shy now. This is the interactive portion. Anybody want to share? Paige, how about you? What if I can call upon some people, put you on the spot? Can you unmute yourself? Maybe Terry can unmute you.
Yeah.
There we go.
I am not a dominant for sure. That is not me. To say my ex-husband wasn't a dominant. But I have to qualify. I mean, he retired as a general in the Army, so his personality type fit his position and his role perfectly. Yes.
Right. And so you could actually really see your ex-husband in this role, right? And as that personality type. Now, I'm not going to go into why is he your ex-husband and whether it had to do with anything being dominant, but that's for another time. But Paige, I just really appreciate you contributing and validating that. So let's keep going for the sake of the presentation. The next quality is influencer. So if you look at influencers, they're the person who shaped that environment, active, but they're focused on people. So these are some of the best people that you're ever going to meet. They're very charming, very convincing. They're the super optimistic people. You can do it. You can do it. They believe in anything is possible. They can be very persuasive. Their motto is hurry up because they're active, but they want to talk, right? Because they really love engaging with people. So in film, TV, media, if you've ever seen The Office or Friends or The Big Bang Theory, these are just some other characters that are just very, very personable, very charismatic, that represent that influencer type, right? Focus on people. And let's go into how they bring value to the team. So it's great to have influencers on your team. Why? They're optimistic. When everybody's down, they're like, come on, everybody, let's do it. We can do it. They're all about motivating others for a goal. And whenever there's conflict, they're coming in there like, hey, everybody, can't we all just get along? Listen, what's your perspective? What's your perspective? Let's work it out. And that's what's really nice to have them as part of your team. Now, if you're going to have them in a working environment, they need to have a high degree of people contact. So if I'm an influencer and I have a boss or a manager, do you think it's smart for them to lock me in an office in a little closet downstairs in the basement to just work on the computer and code? No. Okay. You need to be around people. I've even had employees that were, high influencers, maybe even higher than me. And guess what? They were always meeting hello. They actually were working one day at their laptop, at their computer station. The other time they're working in the cafeteria, their kitchen. It's just all about high degree of people connecting with all these different individuals. That means they also need freedom of movement. And what they need as a supervisor is they need a democratic supervisor. Just like dominants, how they need a forum to express themselves, influencers have different ideas. They want to be heard. So even if you're a manager and you have a high influencer and they want to give your feedback and they have a different idea, the whole point is listen to them anyway. They won't actually care whether you decide to go with their idea or not. They just wanted the opportunity to express their opinions, their perspective, and will still happy go along if their ideas lack merit, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's the type of supervisor. I'm a high I. And I remember working for a lot of different dominants, right, which is very popular in terms of the workplace. And it was constantly very frustrating to have dominants not wanting to hear my opinions or things like that. So learning how to navigate, we're going to talk a little later in about 10 minutes, how to style flex to these different personality types. And we'll go into what are those things that you can do. The next is under stress. Guess what? Eyes will be very self-promoting, talking about themselves. They'll be overly optimistic and just talk, won't stop talking. Why? Because they're nervous. They don't like the silence. I've done presentations where I'm doing a presentation to an audience and I'm answering a question and all I see is blank faces. And then I'm nervous and I'm like, did they even understand what I'm saying? And like, let me just explain it in a different way, saying the exact same thing. And you just can't flip the switch, right? And I really had at one point advice given to me, Tim, you need to speak less. All right, we got your point the first time. So if you're a high I, it's, the phrase is, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we would listen twice as much as we speak. So again, something that we all have to learn about. And then possible limitations is they can be very inattentive to details, be really unrealistic in appraising people. Now, I've been guilty of this, right? When earlier in my career, I believed everybody can do anything. You can do it. And what I started to realize is that certain people have different skills, and some people can accomplish something and other people can't. And so you really want to be able to, take that away and realize whenever you're giving a task to somebody, do they have the skills, talents, and abilities to get it done, as opposed to just loving people so much that you think that anything can be possible. Again, if you have that, it could be a limitation for you. And they could be situational listeners and easily distracted. If you ever seen the Disney movie Up, where they actually put a collar on a dog that they can actually talk, and the dog is talking, and then he's like, squirrel. That's what the influencers are like, right? If you're saying something and you start to see them easily distracted, wanting to do something, why? Because they're about people, excitement, energy, and whatever you may be talking about, they might be becoming easily distracted about something else. Okay, so that's influencers. So is anybody here identify as an influencer? You can maybe just raise your hand, or if you know somebody who's an influencer, again, I'm a recovering influencer. My goal is to be all these personalities and learn all these different traits, is what I want all of you to do as well. So let's keep going. The next personality is steadiness or stability, right? Depending on your assessment. These are your adaptive, right? Thoughtful people when they enter that environment, but they also really care about people too. So if you think about different characters in, film, celebrities, movies, from the Big Bang Theory, you have Raj, you have Oprah, you have Phoebe. Again, these are people that are very friendly. If you have somebody in your life that is high degree of steadiness, they're the best friend, right? Because they're always a good listener. They just want to listen to you. What do you have to say? What are your thoughts and feelings? They're the best team players because you ask them to do something and they're just going to keep doing it, right? For them, and their motto is, we all need to stop and listen more. That's their motto of how they believe that you should operate by. So how do they bring value to the team? They're dependable. They love to work for a leader or a cause, and they're service oriented. A great group of people, great team members. Now, the ideal working environment is they want stability, right? They need that predictable environment. They love long-term work relationships and little conflict between people. So if you give me the task, I go to work, I show up at 9 o'clock, I do my tasks, I go home at 5, I'm happy. I don't need anything. I don't need any challenge, just need exactly what I need to do. And I'm home, I've contributed, I've helped, that's it. That's good, right? And then whenever there's a conflict, they're like, no, we don't need conflict, okay? Now, under stress, I kind of view steadiness as turtles, right? Whenever some kind of stress or stimuli, whoop, they go in their shell, right? And you don't know what they're thinking, what they're doing. They may be hesitant. So it's like, okay, pull the trigger, buy something, do it something. And they're like, I don't know, like, I'm not so sure, because they might be a little bit risk aversive, right? And then they tend to be inflexible, especially when it's under high stress. For example, I've seen a committee who's planning some kind of festival, and suddenly somebody, maybe the I, says, let's change the festival. Let's go, do some brand new theme. And you could start to see the blood rushing out of their face. They're like, no, we only have 1 month left. Let's not change. Like, let's just do exactly what we needed to do before. So again, those are your steadiness individuals. Don't want to change because they're under high stress. Now, limitations: yield to controversy, right? Meaning, I don't want to fight. You're right. Let's just do whatever you want. Again, that could be a limitation. They dislike change, unwarranted change, and difficulty in dealing with diverse situations, right? I've never done this before. Boom, they become paralyzed. Boss, manager, I don't know what to do. I've never encountered this situation before. As opposed to the dominant, they're like, all right, let's figure it out. Let's wing this baby, and they'll figure it out. So again, some of you may know a lot of different individuals that are high degrees of steadiness. And then the last DISC personality type is C, for conscientiousness. So if you've ever seen The Office, I see the perfect characters is Dwight Schrute, right? Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory. And I even use an example of Barack Obama, right? Because again, these are individuals who are very intellectual. It's all about problem solving. Now, I would say Barack Obama has a little bit of influence because he can be very charming and very influential. But if you just take that side, I could see him as being very, very highly conscientious. They're all about accuracy. They're very analytical. They love to solve problems, high standards, very precise. If their motto is, let's stop and let's check again to make sure that it's right. So if you ever go to with your group of friends and you say, hey, what do you think of that movie? And they say, hey, I thought it was great. What is their response? If you ask the conscientious person, they would say, very detailed oriented. Well, I believe the movie was above average. The plot was very weak, but the music was, very good. And so do you see how precise they become? They can't just say it was good, it was bad. It's all about being precise for them. They love to solve the problems. They love to be accurate, and you're perfectionists because they don't want to make mistakes. That's why if you're writing an email, your dominant would have already sent out 3 emails or 4 emails, but your conscientious person wrote an email and is checking the email again. And then after they checked it once, they're checking it again, trying to find grammar mistakes, edits, things like that. I see Marissa, laughing a little bit. Maybe that it's either you or you might know somebody like that. So, okay, so it's you. Value to the team. So they're very conscientious. They're very steady. They're really good at saying, okay, we're talking about all these different things. Let's figure out what the real problem is and let's get clarified on it. And so it really kind of cuts through all the kind of the BS that's going on. They're your objective anchor of reality. So if you have your influencers like, let's build a roller coaster in like 6 months, we can all do it, team, rah, rah, rah. And guess what? Your conscientious person is going to say, no, the average time it takes to build a roller coaster is 2 years. And I think we need a buffer of about an extra 6 months to plan for any contingencies. So that's not possible. So that's your highly conscientious person. Now, the ideal environment, critical thinking, technical work, familiar work environment. So remember how I talked about that I working in a closet with a computer? Well, for some of your conscientious people, that's exactly what they need. They don't need a high degree of people. Who are your engineers? Who are your programmers? Who are your people in the lab that don't contact anybody? But guess what? They love what they're doing. Why? Because they're trying to solve the problem. They're trying to figure out the solution, coming up with construction, create the code, whatever it may be. So when they're under high stress, guess what happens? They can be very pessimistic. No, that can't be done. That can't be done, right? Because they're so, perfectionist, and they think that it needs to be done a certain way. And so anytime someone can have an idea, because they're under high stress, it can't be done. They can be overly picky and overly critical. I have to admit, I was very highly conscientious in my job. And whenever I was like leading leadership conferences and I had my team members perform and speak, and then my team members would come up to me super excited. And again, the president, the founder of the company was right behind me. And I wanted everything to be perfect. And they say, Tim, how did I do? And I said, well, you did this really well, but you didn't do this, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do this. I was so nitpicky and overly critical, and you could just see their enthusiasm die off. And so again, I have had to learn as a manager to not be so overly critical. Take one thing that was really awesome, take one thing, the biggest thing that they can improve, and then just end with a compliment. Again, something that you have to learn to be a good manager. And then limitations. Be defensive when criticized. Now, remember how I said conscientious are perfectionists? Whew, have you ever tried to call a conscientious person out for not doing something? Hey, Tim, you know what? That presentation went on way too long or was way too short. You should have been much more detailed. What would the conscientious person say? Well, that can't be true. I was told I only had 10 minutes and I would have liked to have put in a lot more information in there. Like they'll slip out of everything because they have why? Because they're perfect. They want to do everything. They're so accurate and detailed. So you better come correct if you have some criticism for your conscientious people. Another thing is they get bogged down in the detail. They may appear not friendly, very cold or distant. So again, these are very, very characteristics of conscientious. So let's jump into how to flex to these different personality types. So if you're talking to a dominant, get to the point. Don't waste time. Don't have small talk. Don't ask them all about their life and their life story. Just be brief. Give direct and honest answers to their questions. There's nothing that upsets a dominant more when they ask you, hey, is this a yes or no question? Yes or no? And then suddenly you don't answer their question. You're like, well, it could be this or it could be that. And it's like, oh my goodness, you're driving the dominant crazy. They're hurry up, let's go. And you're spending the time giving a whole long answer. Be very loud and clear, because if you're quiet and timid, they're like, speak up, I can't hear you. Like, they can be a little bit more assertive and confrontational. And so they can actually respect people who are a lot more confident. I've actually seen dominants who challenge people directly. And remember me, I was a very agreeable person. I don't want any conflict. For those of you who are steadiness people, well, guess what? The moment that I actually stood up to them and said, no, we need to do this, they're like, okay, I respect you now. I'm like, I didn't know I was being under, being studied to whether I deserve respect or not. But this is how these individuals, or some of these individuals, operated. So being able to be assertive and direct with these people is very important. And if you've ever seen two dominants go at it in a conversation, it looks like a fight. La 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 la. And guess what? When you ask them, oh my goodness, is everybody okay? Maybe your steadiness people are asking that. They're like, no, it was perfect. We resolved our conflict. You're like, I thought you guys wanted to kill each other. And they're like, no, we just had different perspectives and we hashed it out. We're like, okay. So again, learning how to communicate to this type of people is going to be very important. Influencers, be friendly, socialize, get to the matter at hand, be funny, be attentive, and be sincere. I remember in my job where people would learn about DISC and they knew that I was a high I, and suddenly they would come up to me and they wanted to ask me all these questions, personal questions. Tim, how's your wife? How's your cats? How are your dogs? And all this other kind of stuff. And I knew this individual was a dominant, but they were trying so hard to be friendly that it just came off so unsincere and so phony. Listen, you don't have to interview their whole life story and be super friendly. It's just about smiling. It's just about being nice. Hey, Tim, how are you going? Oh, I'm doing great. How are you doing? I'm doing fine. Listen, I have a quick question for you. Can you help me out? Sure. What can I do for you? Like, it doesn't have to be even any more than that. Right. So again, just something to be aware of when connecting with influencers. Your steadiness individuals. This is the group that you have to be a little bit more gentle with, right? Don't be so harsh. Don't be so critical, right? Because they're going to shut down, right? You really want their thoughts and opinions. They're very observant people, so you really care about their feedback. Well, going back to that analogy of the movies, which I think is just such an easy example to kind of illustrate these points. If you asked a steadiness person who you went to the movie theaters with, what'd you think of the movie? What do they react? Oh my goodness, like, how could you ask me that question? I just got out of the movie theater. Like, I need some time to process and think. I don't know how I feel about that movie. So again, if you know that this person has a high degree of steadiness, I might go first. I would say, well, hey, listen, I really like this movie. I like these characters. I like this. What do you think? You're like, oh, yeah, I do see what you're saying. I did like those characters, but I actually like this. You just give them some more time to think and process and allow to contribute. Don't rush them. So sometimes you'll be, if you're a dominant or know somebody is like, okay, give me your answer now. We need to move forward. That's too intimidating for them. Maybe they need some time to process. Hey, why don't you give some time to think about it? But let me know tomorrow if you have any other questions or concerns. And so give them that time to digest, unless it's a real in a rush, they'll appreciate that. And I also learned something in my leadership development. I wonder if all of you have heard it as well. It's called praise. What it goes? Criticize privately and praise publicly, right? Maybe some of you ever heard of that, right? Because you'd think, oh, okay, no one likes to be criticized out in terms of the general public, but everybody loves praise, right? If you give them compliments. No, that was wrong. I actually discovered in studying personality types, steadiness individuals don't want to be praised in public. Guess what? That could be embarrassing. You're putting all this attention and pressure on them, and they would suddenly blush and they're not listening. It would be much better if you go them on an individual basis and say, hey, Lisa, hey, Johnny, I just wanted to say that event that you put together, or that project, it was fantastic. You did a really good job. I just really appreciate you for all the great work you're doing. Appreciate it. Thanks. They love it. That made their day. But if you did that in a whole public setting, they probably wouldn't even hear your compliment because they're so embarrassed thinking about how you put them on blast. Again, something to consider. And then the last one is conscientious individuals. They are all about the facts and the details. Give them figures, give them as many details as possible. Don't get too personal, right? They love the intellect. They love the idea of solving the problem, the challenge. So if you recognize them for using their intellect for solving those problems, that's the best compliment that you can give them. Okay, so that's it for this portion of the presentation. Again, if you liked it a lot more, go onto the Shift Code community and watch it. I also have, as Terry explained, another module or another training called Biggest Challenge Conscious Entrepreneur entrepreneurs face and mastering success habits. So some of the topics that we're going to be cover is what are the most important questions to ask yourself when doing a task, how to say no without disappointing others. So those of you who are high S's, right, or high I's, that might be very important for you to know. We're going to do a very life-changing exercise to help you become more successful, habits of the most successful entrepreneurs, leadership, we're going to talk about much more in detail, and how to instantly gain credibility when you screw up. So I really appreciate all the time and thank you. We have some time for Q&A, and here's my email, tim.paul.duffy@gmail.com. Here's my phone number. And I think, Terry, if you can copy and paste in the chat the post assessment, I would love to have your feedback. So what did you learn in this training? What did you like? What did you didn't like? What could I include differently? So I really love your feedback. And once you hit that Google survey post assessment, as a thank you message, there's a free gift, a download that you can all get. It's called 49 of the most common interview questions. So I designed this for people to help get jobs or interviews, but as you all are conscious entrepreneurs, you may have to hire contractors or need to hire employees. What do you ask them during those interview process? So that would be a good gauge of different questions that you could ask. So thank you so much. I'll open up to Q&A and appreciate the time.
So anybody have any questions for Tim? And I do want to say one thing while people are thinking through their questions, Tim. This is fabulous. And I think you did a really good job of equipping entrepreneurs. So many of our members have scaled their business from being solopreneurs to actually the next level where they've got contractors and are thinking about adding team members. And, it's a big difference to go from doing everything yourself to doing it with other people. And I think you did an amazing job equipping them. So thank you for that.
No, thank you, Terry. And it's also very important that once you understand your personality type, all right, and remember, we can all have these different personalities, but one or two may be more dominant than others. It's important to get a team that complement you. So again, if you're a high D, high I, and, very all about getting stuff done and, you're really excited in what's possible, maybe you need a team member that's much more conscientious, that actually you purposely have them on your team to pump the brakes, right? Hey, what are our priorities? What should we focus on? That's not really realistic. Or, or learning how to manage those steadiness individuals, right? Because you need somebody with stability. So I think that that's going to be very important. So thanks, Terry. I appreciate it.